Okay, let's go back to the MusicPlayer app that we created in the previous lab exercise. And you can see that being shown in the emulator on the right here. Now, when you look at the user interface of this MusicPlayer, it is fairly simple. It, of course, does the playback of the songs as we intended it to do, but the user interface looks fairly simple. So let's try and improve this user interface by including certain images for the buttons instead of using buttons with text on them, and do some further enhancements to the user interface. So we'll go about editing the user interface of this music player to enhance it further. So to do that, we'll go to the source and then open up the layout of the music player activity that we created. So you see that we have these 4 buttons at the bottom. So let's go ahead and get rid of them, and then we'll replace them with buttons that use images for representing the various actions that we have here. So when you look at a music player app on your mobile device, you see that the play button has a certain image being used for it. The pause button has a certain image. These are standardized images that you use for representations that you use for all these functions in any audio application. So to help you out, what I have done is I have already included some graphic images in these folders called the drawable folders here. So I just opened one of those drawable folders to illustrate to you the list of images there. Now, similarly, if you open any one of these other drawable folders, you notice that you do have the same image files being repeated in all these 4. Now, obviously, the question arises, why do I have the same image files in 4 different folders? Now, each of these folders corresponds to the different screen resolutions that Android can support. For example, an HDPI, LDPI, MDPI, and XHDPI are defined in Android as some kind of standard representations of different screen resolutions that different Android devices use in practice. Now, by definition, LDPI is a low resolution DPI image, and then so you would MDPI is medium, HDPI is high, and XHDPI is for extra high. Typically, a 1280 by 720 or 1280 by 800 image would be something like an XHDPI. So that also depends upon the pixel density on the screen. Now, to know more details about all these things, you can go to the Android developers website, and then there is a lot of documentation about it there. But for the moment, when you create an app for one particular screen resolution, and if you simply use all images of the same screen resolution, then it won't work for all the different screen resolutions. So what they suggest is for you to include images of different sizes into these 4 different folders. The low obviously has a much smaller representation of that image, and XHDPI is typically 4 times the size of the LDPI. It's the same image but with 4 times the pixel density and so on. So if you are familiar with image editing, you know how to create the same image at 4 different resolutions. So in Android, you should be able to provide those in practice. So to make it convenient for you, I have already loaded in some of the images that we're going to make use of in this application in these folders. At some other point, we will revisit saying how we would include a new graphic image into one of these folders. Perhaps when we are covering the graphics section, we'll come back to looking at that in more detail. Okay, for the moment, just go ahead and make use of the images in here. Now, when you include any image in here, by default, Android will create a ID for these images, so you can reference them within your code by making use of the particular ID. So it'll be either r.id. R dot, in case of drawables, it'll be r.drawable dot and so on. As we go through the exercise, we'll see how we can include those images into designing the user interface. Now, first and foremost, let's get rid of all these 4 buttons at the bottom so that we can replace them with images representing these functionalities on the screen. So I will select each one of these buttons and then delete them. Okay, so now I have the linear layout down below here. And for the linear layout, obviously the width and height are set up appropriately, and then so it will adjust itself to the width of the content that is included in there. Now, first, let's go ahead and include the player button in here. Now, if you include anything in a linear layout, if you want them to be centered on the screen, the different widgets that you include inside the linear layout, if you want to be centered on the screen, then you can go in and set the gravity parameter here to be center. So that way, any images that are included will be centered on the screen. In order to include image buttons on the screen, this is the standard button that you have seen earlier, but for image buttons, you go to the images and media folder, and then there you will see an image button in there. So let's drag in an image button and then position it right in the middle of the screen, and then you would see that a suggestion for a drawable resource will pop up here. So let's go down this list and then select image button play, and then you notice that the button, a play button image is being shown on the right side. So let's use that as the representation for the image button there. So there you see the play button popping up. Now, in order for creating a better screen, so what we will do is, you see that this button has some kind of background here. So I will set the background of this to null, so that I'll minimize the amount of screen space that the button uses. So if you go into the properties of the image button on the right side, and then to background, if you just type null, then the background will be set equal to null, and the button will simply occupy just enough space to represent only that. So that basically helps us to design a nice user interface. Now, let's add in, if you recall, you had a pause button. Now, typically when you look at any audio player or music player on your mobile device, you don't have a separate pause button. Most often the play button will turn into a pause button when you start playing the music, and the pause button will move to the play button when you start playing the music again, and so on. So we're going to introduce that functionality later. So this play button, this location, will try to turn this into a pause button and then back to the play button, depending on whether the music is being played or not, or the music is currently stopped, and so on. So this same position will be occupied by both the play and the pause button. So once we have included the button, let's also name that button as, instead of image button 1, if you recall, we named the play button as play before. So let's rename that as a play button. Okay, and then just ignore that and go ahead and save that. So this button will now be named as ID play, so it can be referenced in the code. Now we need a forward button there. So we will go into our list here. When you try to include an image button, this will pop up. This is a list of all the images that I've already included there. Now, just ignore the remaining ones. We'll come back to use them at some point in time. So we'll select the image forward button. Again, go and change the background to null so that it occupies minimum space on the screen, and then rename it as forward and say yes. You can cancel that because we need to go and edit the code later on to reference this particular button. Now, to the left of the play button, we'll include the rewind button here. So we'll bring the rewind button and put it right there. So back to our list, let me look for the rewind button. So this is the rewind button, and I'll go ahead and include that. And again, the same process, null, and change the ID to rewind. Now, in addition to these two, on the two sides of the play button, we'll also include the next and the previous button in here. For the next and previous button, we won't include the functionality at the moment. We'll come back to do that at some point in time later. So let me include the next button here, and then I will name it as next. For this particular exercise, we'll leave it unactivated. We'll come back and activate it at some point in time in the future. And then again, set the background to null. And also we'll include a previous button. So this next and previous will allow us to go to the next and previous song if we had a list of songs that we need to play. Now at this moment, I haven't activated that functionality yet, so these buttons don't make much sense at the moment, but later on we are going to modify the MusicPlayer app to allow us to play multiple songs. So we're going to make use of these buttons at that point. So this button, I'm going to name it as PREV for previous button, and then leave it there. So now you already have a nice looking set of buttons down there which represent the functionality of the music player. So in order to make it more highlightable, or rather stand out, let me go ahead and change the color of the linear layout inside which they are enclosed to a slightly different color so that it's more prominently visible there. So I can select the linear layout and then go in and change the value of the background here. So I will use one of the standard Android's built-in colors. So I would say Android color darker gray, so that you can it is more clearer. You can type in any 6-digit standard RGB code in there also, and it'll work just as fine to set the color of the background here. So Android allows you to specify colors in RGB format. You can explicitly define them in resources and then make use of them, and so on. So at some point later, we will see how we can define our own custom colors and give them names and then make use of them within our code. So now the music player looks a little bit more professional than before. Now, in addition, typically in a music player, you would also see the title of the song being displayed on the screen. So to display a title of the song, let's make use of a text view. So let me drag in a text view to the screen and then position it right below, right at the top there, and then let me change some of the properties. So I will call this text view as song title. Obviously, makes sense. And the text view would be, so let's create the song title there. The text in here will be song title, and then the text size, I will set it to 18 dp, or actually in case of text it should be 18 sp rather, so that the title looks a bit more prominent in there. Now the text view, let me stretch for the entire width of the screen so that it can accommodate different text sizes. So for the layout parameters, I will go in and then change the width to 'match parent', and then we will also center the text. So for the text view, if you go into the so you see that the text view is positioned to the top, and for the text itself, let's set the gravity value to be center, so that the text will be centered on the screen. Okay, so with the change, of course, if you want the text to be more clearly visible, you can change the background of that if you want, but for the moment I'm just going to leave it as such. So with these changes, now when you have made these changes, obviously previously we were using buttons for each of these. Now we have changed these to image buttons, so obviously I need to go and update my music activity. You already see that the music activity is complaining that there are some errors in there. First and foremost, what I need to do is that all these buttons are no longer simple buttons, they are going to be image buttons. So I will change this to image buttons, and then obviously you see the error popping up, and so I need to import the image buttons. And then every one of them is going to complain. Every one of these is going to complain. So I would have to go in and edit each one of these from button to image buttons. Right now I'm ignoring the prev and next buttons, so I'm just going to only worry about the play button, the rewind, and the forward button. Now, and as you recall, I removed the pause button from the screen. We no longer have an explicit pause button. Instead, the play button is going to act both as a play as well as a pause button. Now, what this means is that I need to explicitly keep track of the situation, whether currently the music player is playing the music or is it in the paused state. So to help me to keep track of it, I created a Boolean variable here called PlayPause and currently set it to true, meaning that currently the play button is active. Now when the playing of the song starts, then I will set PlayPause to false. indicating that it's no longer the play button, it's the pause button instead. So PlayPause true indicates that it is the play button, and PlayPause false indicates that it's the pause button that is being displayed on the screen. So when that particular button is clicked, depending on whether it is acting as a play button or a pause button, I will have to interpret the meaning appropriately within my code. Now, so I have updated the button definitions here. Let me go down, and I notice that I already see a complaint for the pause button. As you recall, I removed the pause button, so I'm going to remove this, but obviously the pause functionality has to be embedded somewhere. So I will retain this for the moment, and let's correct the code appropriately. Now, for the play button, as you realized, when the play button is clicked, depending on whether it is acting as the play or the pause, I should immediately decide whether I'm going to resume the play of the song or pause the currently playing song. Now, recall that I have already introduced the Boolean variable up there called PlayPause. That will help me decide when the button is clicked whether I'm trying to pause the currently playing song, or am I starting the next song. So I can simply use an if statement in order to make the decision. Okay, and then so the else will take care of the pause functionality. Okay, now obviously if play pause is true, that means that the button is displaying the play, is in the play state, which means that I should start playing the music. But when I start playing the music, obviously my button's functionality has to be has to be turned into a pause. So at this point I will have to change the play pause value to false, basically indicating that this button is not acting as a play button, instead it is acting as a pause button. Similarly, when the button, so as you notice, I'm using the else part of the statement. So when the button is acting as a pause button and then I click on it, I will have to pause the currently playing song, and obviously set play pause to true. Okay, with this change to the code in, as you recall, this is the music activity. With that change, now my all my problems are fixed. So let's go ahead and see how the music player plays at this moment. So the new version of the music player with the image buttons in place will now be displayed on the screen. So as you can see on the right side in the emulator, you see the new version of the music player popping up on the screen, and the user interface looks much better than what we had before. Let's go ahead and click on the play button. You can see the music playing in the background now. If I click on the play button, now it is going to pause the music. And then notice that rewind and forward buttons are acting just as before. Now, so that sort of completes the next set of functionality that we want to introduce into the music player application. Okay, so we'll pause at this point. Of course, obviously, there are a few things that I want to fix in this, so that'll be the next version of the lab here. If you have gotten it up to this stage, let's pause and then test out the application, and then we'll continue enhancing it further in the next segment of our lab.